All right, welcome back everyone. Today, our topic is lighting and specifically how we can use lamps in Blender to create different types of light. So we already know about our default lamp. That's this guy hanging out right here. If I render, we can see that the lamp, because it exists up here in the upper right portion of our scene, it's casting light from that direction. So this side of the cube is shadowed, and the rest of the cube is relatively well lit by the lamp. However, in Blender we have several types of lamps. This first one, the one that we use by default, is called a point lamp. But as you can see in our list here, I've listed 4 other types of lamps that we have access to. So I'm going to add these lamps to my scene, and we're going to see what each of them do in turn. So first, I'm going to delete the lamp we have. Let's see what happens when I render with no lamp. Alright, so when I render with no lamp, we can see the outline of our shape, and we can still differentiate between the shape and the background, but the shape is completely black. There's no light being reflected by it, because there's no light being cast upon it. So, let's add a lamp to our scene. We add lamps just like anything else. We can either go to the Create tab and look under the Lamp section. So right here we can see all the different types of lamps that I listed just a second ago are all underneath the lamp section. Or I can use my Shift A shortcut. So I'm going to hold Shift and A and create a lamp. So point we've already seen. Let's take a look at some of our brighter lamps, namely Sun and Hemi. Sun is a type of lamp that provides a good amount of light at a particular angle. So right now, the angle of the sun you can see is straight down. If I render, I get light, but the light is coming straight down from the top of the cube. Notice that the sun does not have to be directly over my cube for it to render that way. The sun is kind of like a global lamp. It applies light from everywhere, and it's only changing the angle that really makes a difference. So no matter where my sun is placed, right now the angle of the light is still going to be straight down on my shape. If I change the angle, then it'll change the angle that the light is being cast on my cube. For example, the easiest way for me to change my angle is using the Rotate tool. So I'm going to go to Front View, and I'm going to press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate my cube, or my sun, out this way, and let's see how that changes the lighting. So now we can see that because my sun is angled towards my cube, it now lights up as if the sun were coming from this direction. But again, it doesn't matter where I move the sun. No matter where I move the sun, the render is going to be the same. So a sun lamp acts as a global sun for the entire scene, and it only alters the angle of the light. It doesn't actually change the location of the light. All right. So that's our sun lamp. Sun lamps control. Oh, I don't want caps lock on. Control the angle of light. I'm going to skip spot for a second and talk about Hemi and area because they're both pretty similar. So I'm going to delete this guy. I'm going to add a Hemi lamp. And Hemi is kind of like sun, except its position actually matters. So if I render right now, I can see that the entire cube is lit up. That's because Hemi provides a very powerful light. Hemi is meant for lighting up things like an entire room or a large scene, but it's not necessarily meant to light up a single object. If I bring the Hemi over here, I can still see that the Hemi is so powerful that it lights up the entire cube. I'd have to move this Hemi much farther away for it to really start to dim. See if I can do that. Let's bring this guy way up and see if it changes. We're still getting bright light, so that Hemi light is very, very powerful. Same kind of goes for area. If I delete this guy and then add an area lamp, I get something very similar. Again, I get an angle that I can control, but the light itself is incredibly bright. We can see that the cube looks completely washed out because an area light is so bright. So again, area lights are for illuminating a huge scene or for illuminating things that are far away. So I'm going to add that to our little notes here. Both Hemi and area provide great amounts of light for an area. And that's both of these guys. Area is exactly the same way. Point is our default lamp. And finally, we have spot. Spot, as you would imagine, is a single point or beam of light, just like a spotlight. So I'm going to get rid of this lamp. And I'm going to add a spot lamp. Now, spot lamp, as you can see, shows us what the beam, it kind of outlines what the beam of light will look like. So if I rotate this guy up and move him over towards my square, it looks like the light is pretty much going to cover that side of the square. So let's see what that looks like. We can see that our spot is only illuminating in a small circle here because it's only breaking out, emitting from this point, and then coming outward in a beam of light in this direction. So as you may have guessed, we're going to use spotlights to be able to add a light to our lighthouse. What we kind of want is something like this, where the spotlight's hanging out in the top of the lighthouse and emitting a beam. Let's see what that looks like. Unfortunately, we have a problem. The spotlight is not pointed at the cube, so there's no way to see the light coming out. To actually make light visible, we have to use some lamp settings, which we're going to talk about next. To properly demonstrate lamp settings, though, I'm going to add a regular old point lamp back in here. So I should be able to see my cube now. Good. Back this up just a little bit. All right. So for our lamp settings, whenever we have a lamp selected, we can go to the button bar and we'll find an image that looks like the same image as our lamp type. So because this is a point lamp, my lamp settings is a point lamp icon. When I click my lamp settings, there are a couple of settings that I care about. The first one is the type of lamp. So if I want to, rather than deleting a lamp and adding a new one, I can change the type of lamp on the fly. So I can go from point to sun to spot to Hemi to area, and we can see little previews of what these lamps look like in our preview box here. So I can switch the type, which is great, but I also can switch the color of my lamp. So if I want, I can make it blue light, and then when I render, I get a blue color that's splashed over everything in the scene because I have blue light that is washing over it. So blue light is going to make everything look blue. I'm going to put this guy back to white. Keep it pure. Let's see. So pure white light is just going to show up whatever color's here, right? And so in this case, because our cube just has a regular gray material on it, that's the color that shows up. The other thing that we care about is our energy. So energy governs how powerful the lamp is. And by changing how powerful the lamp is, we can change the brightness of the light in the scene. So if I make this a 5 instead of a 1, we should see that my cube looks much brighter. If I drop energy to a 0.2, my cube looks much dimmer. So energy is controlling the magnitude of the light without actually moving it. This prevents me from having to move the lamp around to get different lighting effects. I can just set my energy to whatever I want, and then it affects the scene without having to move the lamp. Distance controls how far the lamp shines. So if I moved this lamp more than 25 grid spaces away, then my cube would not be lit up anymore. So if we're not seeing light where we expect it, we might want to try changing the distance. But we also, if it's a really big scene or a really big room, we could also try changing our lamp types. Okay. However, this does not solve the problem of why we can't see our spotlight. So let's see if we can find a setting that will allow us to make our spotlight visible. So rather than just seeing where our spotlight hits on an object, we want this beam to actually show up. We are going to do that in our spotlight settings. So notice that when I switch to point, I have very few settings here. But as soon as I go to spotlight, there is a whole bunch of extra settings that allow us to do what we need to do. One of the most important is deciding the type of shadow. So in Blender, spotlights are the only type of light that has a buffer shadow. You look at point, it only has no shadow or ray shadow, and that's the same for all of these guys. No shadow, ray shadow. Spot has a special shadow called buffer that is actually a little bit faster and less complicated for Blender to work with. Ray shadows are very, very complex, and you'll notice that if we look at our other lamps, it always checks off no shadow by default. The reason it does that is because shadows are very complicated. So if I start adding ray shadows to my scene, Blender is going to take longer to render the scene because it's got to do a bunch of calculations for the ray shadows. The ray shadows are really hard for Blender to do. Spot lights have a compromise called buffer shadow that allows them to handle shadows a little bit easier. So spotlights are better than all other lights at handling shadows because they're the only lamp that has a buffer shadow. However, this still doesn't fix our problem of not being able to see the light. We see the light by checking off this halo box. Halo means make the spotlight visible. So by checking that off when we render, we now see that the beam of light actually comes out of our cube. However, this doesn't really look like a spotlight, right? For a spotlight in a lighthouse to really look genuine, there needs to be something here that the spotlight is coming out of. So we need to create a small sphere that's going to look like it's emitting the light. And to do that, I am going to add a sphere to the scene. I'm going to make this sphere a little bit smaller using my S for scale. And then we're going to take a look at a new material setting. So first of all, if I want to add to my lamp settings here, lamp settings, we know that we have energy, which is how bright the lamp is, color, and distance. And for spotlights, also have buffer shadows and halo. Objects can have halos as well. So if I go to the material settings on this sphere and I give it a material, notice that the default selection for a material is surface. Surface means that I'm actually covering the surface with a color. But if I didn't want to do that, I could add something called halo. A halo is just a type of material that looks like light. So rather than actually being the surface of the object, it makes this starry shape. So let's see what that looks like rendered. Okay, so we're getting something now that looks like a glowing lamp. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down even more. It's a little bit more like a pinpoint of light. Let's try that. All right, I like that better. And then we can change everything about the halo using these settings here. So notice that even though this is a material, we don't have color options anymore because now this object is just light. It's not actually emitting any color. So I can change the look of this a little bit by adding rings and star tips. Let's see what happens if we add rings and star tips. It should make our shape look a little bit different. We can start to see there's some rings in here. We can start to see some points on the edges. See what happens if we add some lines. All right, the lines are making these little starburst effects on the edge of our object. But this is how in our lighthouse we can add a spotlight and an object, and as long as both the spotlight and the sphere are haloed, then it will look like we've got this little bit of light that is producing a great beam of light from our lighthouse. So this last part of the video is what you're going to want to follow to be able to put a lamp in your lighthouse. And you can experiment with these settings however you like, see how you get the light to change, see if you can get the best looking lamp that you need for your lighthouse. But halo is the thing that we want to actually make our light visible. So all of this is because of the halo setting. In class tomorrow, you guys are going to be using lamps to light up scenes, as well as adding a lamp or a spotlight to your lighthouse. So you're basically going to need all of this video, but the first half of the video is going to help you in lighting a scene. The last part of the video is going to help you with your lighthouse. Next, we will be moving on to camera settings, and we're finally going to talk about how to create some scenery and add some more stuff to our scene.